I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network, chatting with writers and authors who offer an added perspective for our listeners. This is The Color Between the Lines.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Joining me on this edition of Color Between the Lines, we're speaking with the author Zee Clarke, who wrote the recently released book called Black People Breathe, a mindfulness guide to racial healing. Clarke is a Harvard MBA breathwork expert who shares different mindfulness techniques and breathing techniques to deal with traumatic experiences in her life, including encounters with police. In the book, she connects a lot of those experiences to trauma that other Black people experience when facing discrimination and racism. Thank you. Welcome, Zee Clarke, to the BIN.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Awesome. Well, in this book, you talk about something that has been addressed by many people, especially since the murder of George Floyd, and watching video beatings and shootings by the hands of police, and what kind of trauma that is for a lot of Black people who may not even realize it when they're watching it. You explain in different ways how to keep that trauma from being internalized and hurting a person over and over again. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it is very, very traumatic to watch any sort of violence. And then when you see violence in your own community against people in your own community, that's just even worse, right? And that actually has a negative impact on our mental health. A Harvard professor at the School of Public Health did a study that showed that the death of an unarmed Black person at the hands of the police results in worse mental health for the entire Black population of the state for 3 months. And I just want to point out that even when you're not living in the state, we are still impacted. And that worse mental health impact gets compounded over and over again, because it's not just a one-time event. And then another thing that I just want to point out is epigenetics. So family inherited trauma. There are studies that now show that the studies were done with mice, right? But if you could extrapolate. But a study was done that showed that they put mice, they gave them a certain scent, right? A cherry blossom scent. And every time they had that scent, those mice got an electric shock. So every time that they smelled it, they were like getting into fight or flight mode, like I'm going to be attacked, right? Those mice had children. Those children were never shocked. And yet they too went into fight or flight mode, that like, I'm going to be attacked every time they had that scent. That lasted for 3 generations in mice, maybe 11 generations in worms, right? And recent studies have actually been looking at humans, particularly around 9/11, Holocaust, the descendants of Holocaust survivors. And so when we watch the trauma, when we witness the assault on people that look like us, that's going to bring up the historical generational trauma, as well as what we're experiencing right now. And so in my book, Black People Breathe, I invite people to be mindful of your decision of whether to watch the footage or not. And ask yourself, where am I? Who am I with? How will this impact me? Do I have time for self-care afterwards? Because let's say you're at work, well, then you're in a meeting with a bunch of white people. It's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it is. And it's really good questions that you put throughout the book that help you examine your own self and your own person. And I thought that was very, very good in terms of helping people, just be able to understand their own space and be able to deal with others on the outside. You also wrote in this book, the reason why you wrote this book was to make sure that Black people understood that meditation is a good thing, and it's not just for white folks. And you told, can you talk about why you believe that meditation was just not for folks who look like you?
Yes. Exactly. Well, in the media, we see people meditating and we see people doing yoga, and they typically don't look like us. They tend to be white. They tend to be women. I mean, there are men meditation teachers, but usually I think meditation, I think yoga, and I think a blonde white woman sitting on the beach, a woman that looks like she has never had any problems. And we all have problems, yes. However, that didn't inspire me to use these tools, because I was like, that person doesn't understand me. And the irony is that that person or group of people, they did not invent these tools. Mindfulness, yoga, all of these things were created by people of color, people with melanin. And yet these tools can be so helpful for us. Because if you look at the impacts of racism, discrimination, microaggressions, they cause chronic stress. And when you look at the symptoms of chronic stress, they really align to a lot of the health problems that we as a people face. High blood pressure, that is a symptom of chronic stress. Diabetes, who has higher rates of diabetes? Us. So many things, a weakened immune system. If you look at the death rates for COVID, right? And our community was disproportionately impacted. Our immune systems are already weaker due to all of these challenges that we are facing. It causes accelerated aging. Dr. Martin Luther King was 39 when he passed. However, autopsies showed that he had a heart of a 60-year-old. Now, when you look at the symptoms of chronic stress and the chronic stress we experience as a result of racism, those symptoms can be alleviated by mindfulness and breathwork practices. Medical research shows that they lower your blood pressure, reduce stress, reduce anxiety, and all of the things that we tend to have as a result of how we're treated. So my big realization when I was in India, when I was studying all of these powerful tools, was that this is not only for us, but can have a huge impact on the health of our entire community.
Oh, I loved how the first part of the book, you talk about your personal encounter with police and how you got through it. And it really, for me, reading it, I kind of put myself in your space because I try to kind of like visualize anytime a writer puts anything into words, just try to put myself in that space. Can you talk about that, I guess, that situation and why you wanted to share that in your book?
Yes. Well, this is what happened. It's in the chapter called Shopping While Black. And in Shopping While Black, I share a story where I went to the grocery store. I was going on a cross-country road trip through national parks. So I was going to be camping. Yes, Black people also camp. I also used to think that Black people didn't camp. I thought it was dangerous. I grew up in DC. So, but I was going on this big camping trip. And so when you go camping, you need supplies and food. So I stopped at a grocery store. I spent $220 there on vegan groceries. Yes, I'm currently a vegan. And somebody called the police. A grocery store employee called the police and said that I stole deli meat. And so the police came. I'm in the parking lot trying to put my groceries in the car and kind of playing Tetris. My car was pretty full. And they were like, "Did you purchase those groceries, ma'am?" And I was like, okay, well, this is aggressive, right? You get really scared. Like anytime, even just a standard traffic stop, you get scared because you don't know what the police will do to you. And in this situation, I had the receipt. I showed them the receipt. Then they went through every item, lots of vegetables that I had to explain. And then when they told me they were looking for meat, I explained that I'm a vegan, there's no meat here, but they didn't believe me. They didn't believe me. So they kept searching every crevice of my car, my clothes, my sleeping bag, everything all over the concrete floor of the parking lot. And I'm embarrassed. All these people are driving by and it's like Black person getting harassed by the police. And I was scared. I was so scared that they might do something to me. And especially as they kept going through every vegetable and not believing me, inside of my mind, I wanted to cuss these people out. I wanted to tell them how dumb they were, but I knew what they could do to Black people. And often people think that it's only Black men. But in the last few years, we have seen they also murder Black women. And so it was the belly breath technique that was so helpful for me, because when we are in these situations where we feel threatened, and whether it's the police, which is physical violence, or in the office place, when it's more emotional, kind of verbal, psychological violence, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in. That is our fight, flight, or freeze nervous system. That is our natural system telling us that we are under attack. And when that happens, your heart rate starts beating faster, your breath gets shorter, you might start sweating, and you might say or do things from a place of fear that could get you murdered. So in my case, I wanted to tell these people how dumb they were, and and I wanted to get all aggressive in the face. However, I knew that they might murder me. And so I did a deep belly breath, which is when you inhale, and when you inhale, your belly expands like a balloon. And as you exhale, your belly comes towards your spine. And so it's counterintuitive because we're taught to suck it in, right? Suck in that belly, look skinny, right? But that's actually bad for our nervous system. And so doing this belly breath stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. That is our rest and digest nervous system. That's our ability to be calm. And then from a less triggered place, from a less emotionally charged place, you can decide what to do. You can speak with a tone. So, my code switching voice comes real quick. Belly breath, then the DC in me calms down a little bit. I mean, nothing wrong with DC. I love DC. Shout out to Chuckles. And then, officer, I don't know what to tell you. I'm a vegan. Officer, I'm smile, officer,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But it's dangerous out there. And that's why I wanted to share these stories, because this will not be the last time that I get harassed by the police. And if you are a Black person in this country, whether it is a traffic stop or even somebody just following you around a store, being like, do you need anything? That's what I learned. Can I help you? I learned that is a term for, I suspect you of being a thief. That's what when I went to the grocery store, I was like, well, explain to me. They explained to me that when somebody is suspicious, they send somebody over to you and ask you if you need any help. I was like, I always thought people wanted to know if I actually needed help.
Oh my goodness. I tell you, but it was an interesting story, and I could totally relate. And I know that a lot of our listeners can relate. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Esther Dillard, speaking with Zee Clarke, the author of the book, Black People Breathe, a mindfulness guide to racial healing. Often when people talk about racial healing, they talk about getting I guess, Black folks and white folks in different communities together on common ground. But in this book, you address racial healing in a different way. You more or less talk about that internal person really connecting with themselves. And can you explain why you chose to approach racial healing in that way?
Yes. Well, I do believe that we all should get along, and that part of racial healing is us coming together. However, we need to heal. Like, imagine if you got into a car accident, right? And you needed to go to the hospital, and the doctor needed to look at the broken bone. This is the same thing, except it's not bones. Well, sometimes it's bones, but it's a lot of like internal peace, emotional healing, mental health issues that need to be healed. And sometimes when white people are in these spaces, we don't have space to heal, because then we might be on the defensive, we might be protective, we might not feel safe, psychologically safe in that space. And so I am very much focused on doing things to help with our mental health. And one of the things that I recommend is Black love as medicine. Black love as medicine, which means that sometimes we can just get healing from being around our people. That could be as simple as making a phone call, calling up your girls, or maybe going out and just going to somebody's house and bringing some people together. Or maybe you go to a big event where there is a lot of Black love, but this is also helpful for us. And so, yes, I agree, we should bring people together. But first, we got to make sure that we're okay, because I spent most of my life not okay. And even recently, hearing news about yet another member of the Black community being murdered by the police, not okay. And that requires some internal healing. I want to share a practice called RAIN that I talk about in Black People Breathe. RAIN is a tool to heal when really hard things happen. It's an acronym. R stands for recognize. Recognize how you're feeling. Name the emotion. There is something so powerful around just naming the emotion. I am experiencing fear, or I am experiencing anger. And that creates a separation between you and the emotion. You are not the emotion. The A in RAIN is for allow. Allow that feeling to be there. I grew up in a household, anything bad happened, sweep it under the rug, keep it moving. Ain't nobody got time for tears, right? I'll give you something to cry about, right? This is my childhood. And I was never allowed to feel. But the thing is, if we suppress these feelings, they build up, they build up, they build up. And over time, and suddenly you experience burnout or a breakdown, or you snap at somebody and it has nothing to do with the situation. So allow it to be there. This has a space for right now to be here. The I in RAIN is for investigate. You see, we hold a lot of these stresses and traumas in our body. You might have heard about somatic healing, for example. I love to say the issues are in the tissues, right? Something happens and you feel like you got punched in the stomach, or you feel this like lump in your throat. And so the I in RAIN for investigate is identify, where in the body am I feeling this? I felt those cops in my belly. It was like, ugh! Right. And so just by identifying where in the body allows a little bit of peace, because again, it's like, okay, I am observing this happening. And then the N in RAIN is for nurture. Find a way to make yourself feel better. Maybe it's words that you need to hear. Maybe it's a phone call to somebody that can be very comforting. For me, taking a hand, placing it on the heart, and just taking some deep breaths can be really, really powerful. So whenever something bad happens, I invite everybody to practice RAIN.
Wow. Some really, really great tips. Before we leave, any final words in regard to maybe the overall message of your book?
Yes. This is the overall message of Black People Breathe. We have the power to heal ourselves. You have agency over how you feel. We cannot control what happens around us. We cannot control the actions of people that don't look like us towards us. But what we can control is how we take care of ourselves. And through breathing, you can influence how you feel, whether it is anger, anxiety, fear, self-doubt. For me, breathing is like medicine. Just like you take an Advil when you have a headache, there are certain breathing practices that you can use to help yourself feel better.
Well, thank you, Zee Clarke, for joining us on the BIN.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
The book is Black People Breathe, a mindfulness guide to racial healing. A lot of insight and practical applications that anybody can use on a daily basis to help support you and your mental health. I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network.